Hello, welcome to Long Lost Friends. I'm Elizabeth Eve King.
And I'm Andrea Goyan. And today we are delighted to have joining us author E.C. Ambrose. Welcome to E.C. And we want to tell you a little bit about her. She's written several series: the epic historical fantasy Drake Master, the Dark Apostle series about medieval surgery, and the Bone Guard archaeological thrillers. She's also written a YA science fiction novel, A Wreck of Dragons, and an interactive superhero novel, Sky Strike: Wings of Justice for Choice of Games. Among her long list of accomplishments, she's a graduate of and a teacher at Odyssey Writing Workshop. While researching her novels, ELAINE, E.C., has learned how to hunt with a falcon, clear a building of possible assailants, and pull traction on a broken limb. She is also a fiber artist. Welcome, ELAINE.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Great, welcome ELAINE. And first, can you show us your pets?
Well,
Or
patience a little bit with my camera work.
I'm looking down like I can see down.
Oh,
Yes, this is Lily. Lily is my my exercise guru. She tries to make sure that I don't sit at my desk literally all day and play with my invisible friends. So she's very good for that. And she's this keeper of the schedule. So she knows when tea time is. She knows that it's time to go upstairs. Okay, it's 8 a.m. in the morning. Everyone else has gone to school or work. It is time for you to go upstairs. And even on a day when I need to be out of the office or doing something else, she will sort of follow me around the house looking anxious. So if I go upstairs, I sit in my office chair, she lies down behind me. We get up again and we leave the office right away, but she's content because the schedule has been maintained.
Okay, I know we're not going to get to see your cat, who we saw a photo of earlier.
Sadly.
But is your cat like disruptive of that? Does your cat work against your schedule?
Yes, she does. I have to admit this. I refer to her as my assistant editor because she likes to lie on top of the manuscripts, flicking her tail, which I'm sure is a comment on something. Although, like with human editors, it's often hard to tell exactly what she's commenting on. It's been said that editors usually know where something is wrong, but they're not usually great at telling you exactly what the problem is. So I think Diana is the same way. She likes to play with my index cards when I am brainstorming and will often sprawl out across the outline of cards, which is, as you might know, super helpful.
Very helpful.
Yeah, and maybe your dog was a timekeeper or something, and a schedule maker in another life.
Another dimension.
Another dimension, right?
So we sort of talked ahead of time about your work, and we were fascinated with your research process for working, because you do a lot of sort of historical fantasy, I guess maybe it would be called, novels. And we were really curious about how you determine when to go off and learn something in real life, do hands-on experiences versus Google. That was actually Elizabeth's question. So I just so
sneaky.
Oh,
it's very sneaky. Can't trust questions, man.
Yeah, my research can move in several directions. Sometimes I'm going to a place or visiting a museum, learning about a process or learning about a historical artifact, and I get so fascinated by it that I need to know more, and then end up writing a novel about it and filling in research, with online and library research and those things. And sometimes I'm moving the other direction. I know, I want to research this particular region, and then I want to find out more about certain locations that are there. So that's when the Googling begins, the Wikipedia, following down through the footnotes and the bibliographies and the sort of where to find out more online, which often takes me out into the world, whether that's getting books through the interlibrary loan, or if there's any place that I can go locally to find out more. It's nice when I get to actually travel to the locations that I'm writing about. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it happens sort of asynchronously. So I conceive a desire to go to a place, I start writing a book there, and then I get to visit that place or someplace that's analogous to it sometime after I begin, in which case often there's some changes that have to be made. In one case, I was writing a book that was set partially in Gloucester, Massachusetts, and I had been to Gloucester, but not for a long time. So I had begun writing the book, ended up going to visit, and discovered that the city is a lot more sloped than I remembered. It's very, it's sort of set on the top of a hill and then slopes down toward the harbor, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. But I needed to incorporate that physicality of the environment into the book when I got back and returned to the manuscript. So it's kind of an ebb and flow that moves between many spheres.
So it sounds like
So-
sometimes you're actually interested just in something at a museum or something, and that sparks an idea in a book, rather than going, as well as going the other way around. You're writing something and then you do the research.
Right. So for example, the London Museum, right, the British Museum in London, has an extraordinary collection of all kinds of things. One of the things that they have is an automaton boat that, if you wind it up, would sail across your dining table to carry things to the other diners. And that was fascinating. I took some pictures of it while I was there, and then later on I said, oh, no, I really want to know more about these historical automata, which were often used for such sort of trivial purposes, and ended up picking up some books about it, both at one of the medieval Congress that I attend pretty frequently, and then finding some more specialized resources. And now I have sort of a bookshelf of information about these historical automata, which led me to the Throne of Solomon, that became a feature in the Assassin's Throne, one of my archaeological thriller series. And it was an actual automaton throne that was built during the Byzantine era for the emperor. Theoretically, when the emperor mounted the 7 steps of the throne, there were pairs of animals on each step that would essentially herald his arrival. So the lions would roar, the eagles would raise their wings, and then he would sit on the top, on the throne itself, and the leaves of a tree would spread over him when he sat down. So we have documented accounts of travelers who visited the court during that time and saw the throne, which is just extraordinary to me.
But not the throne itself is gone, I think.
Right. It may have been stripped for materials prior to 1206, but it is highly likely that in 1206, which is when the Crusaders, who were supposed to be going to confront the infidels, ended up actually trashing Constantinople instead. And they destroyed a lot of things. There are descriptions from the Crusaders of the statues and the automated figures that they had thrown down in the streets, and in particular in the Hippodrome.
So were the automated figures and the throne and the boat and all of that, were they wind up? Or did someone have to crank them? I mean, do they know that?
They were mostly wind up,
Wow.
as far as I can tell. Some of them are steam driven. So you would light a candle or light a fire in a particular spot, and then it would warm up the water, and that would cause things to happen. In particular, the Islamic figures often had these kind of steam-driven functions where the steam would then cause things to whistle or musical instruments to play of different kinds. Especially, they used them for clocks frequently. So you would have a clock that would have musical figures playing on the hour.
Wow.
And then that seems like the throne could be, as he stepped on something, it could do a lever that would cause the roar, or whatever. I don't know about a roar, but the lion
Right.
opened down.
Well, if you could picture, say, a bellows that you stepped on, it could send the puff
Oh.
of air that would cause the lion to
That's true.
respond.
Or a
So-
slave is
Wait,
there.
so I misunderstood. So
Ow!
wait, I misunderstood. So going up the stairs were actually automaton animals.
Right.
I pictured someone had actually trained these animals to do that. See?
Oh,
was
that
like,
would be a
wow,
fun approach
that's
too.
impressive.
Sure.
Trained the tree to sprout its leaves when he sat there too.
That I knew.
I
That
wanna
part I
know.
knew was it was an automaton, but I thought that the animals, I thought, wow, how'd they do that? Okay, that's awesome though. I love that.
Well, Mercedes Lackey has her birds trained to poop on command, so things are, that I don't know,
That's
that
true.
That trivia, you love that trivia.
That
so
was the thing that impressed
You
me
said
most.
you go to medieval conferences. Is that what they were called? So it's like,
Right.
explain that.
They're intended for researchers and historians of the Middle Ages to get together and share what they're working on. So it's usually a combination of undergraduate, graduate, and then professional work. There'll be keynote speakers and such. The most famous one is called KZU, because it takes place in Kalamazoo, Michigan, every year, usually around Mother's Day. It's in May, and that's the International Congress on Medieval Studies. They have hundreds of simultaneous presentations. People are talking fast because they want to present their whole paper in the limited time allowed. And often you're sort of getting the cutting edge of history, which sounds like a strange thing to say, except that especially with new technologies and new techniques, we're learning more about the past every day. Oftentimes they're making discoveries within a manuscript. It used to be pretty common to just take a bundle of things, the way that you might put together a notebook, where you say, oh, I learned a bunch of interesting things. I put all this information into a notebook or a collage. They would take all of those different papers copied out of different sources and then bundle them together into a single manuscript. So when those manuscripts then reached libraries a few hundred years later, they would be classified by one thing or another. Oh, I opened the cover and it's a cookbook. So it's classified as whatever the document number is, and it's a cookbook. Except a historian later on looks through and discovers, oh, only the first part is a cookbook. After that, there's a set of recipes for magic spells. And after that, there is a treatise on how to treat particular kinds of wounds. And after that, something mathematical. So all of these different resources are all bundled together, but they're not necessarily recognized until years later.
Wow.
Now, do you get into interest in medieval things through writing fantasy, or was this something you the other way around?
Gosh, I think I'm going to have to blame my dad for this one, because he used to inspire us to read more. And in particular, we used to read together after dinner on Sundays. So we started out with books like The Wolves of Willoughby Chase and The Hobbit, of course, Lord of the Rings. He was a huge Tolkien fan. So that sparked my interest in the fantasy literature. Then I started sort of looking at everything that surrounded it. For a while, I was a member of the Society for Creative Anachronism, which is a medieval recreation group, which definitely sparked more interest in the nitty-gritty, the material culture of the Middle Ages. And that sort of washed back and forth between reading fantasy novels, which I loved, and then learning more about the actual period that theoretically inspired some of those things. And then my first series, which was much more traditional fantasy, less perhaps grounded in reality, but the kings and the princes and the chivalric attitudes of the Middle Ages. And then the Dark Apostle series, of course, was very heavily research based. It was more like what the medieval time really would have been, albeit with magic. But
I glanced at some of the reviews on Amazon, and one of them that caught my eye that I was delightful and funny to me was someone had said that they that it appeared like you had done a lot of research because it seemed like you really knew what you were talking about.
yay!
I was like, yes, she did. Apparently, she did a lot of research. It was really very sweet. But
Yeah, it was funny. One
sorry.
of the early professional reviews, actually, they seemed to enjoy the book and they had some nice things to say. But then also they had this quibble about a particular aspect of medicine that they said was not current in England at the time. And I went, wait. And it was one of those rare instances where someone that I was interacting with knew a lot about medieval surgery, but not at that point as much as I did, which of course is no help to me. So something similar happened in Elisha Barber. The first book in the series includes guns in warfare, which is period accurate to the 14th century. We know that Edward III was making gunpowder at the Tower of London. But when I originally turned in the manuscript, the copy editor sort of complained about it and said, well, it seems like these guns are really anachronistic. They don't really belong. And it was an opportunity. I could have removed them, but it would feel like a detriment to the reality of the period, and especially the kind of shock and awe that those weapons created when they were first introduced in warfare. So instead of removing them, I leaned in. I provided more information. I gave the characters stronger reactions to seeing, hearing, and handling those devices, which would have been extraordinary to the people of that time. And I think that I carried it off pretty well in the end. And I enjoyed the fact that I could take the information, the sort of the factual stuff, and invest the characters in it through their reactions, their fear, their concerns, the bad things that happen to them when those weapons go wrong.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great. When you mentioned learning to hunt with falcons, was that also part of this? How does it happen, or?
It was meant to be. Interestingly, I haven't ended up writing that book yet. The work that I was doing at that time went in a different direction, but it still remains my favorite tax write-off ever. There is a New Hampshire School of Falconry here in the state where I live, so I took the opportunity to go and have a day of falconry with the expert hawkmaster there, and got to interact with several different birds of prey, go out walking with them, and then to have an essentially wild or semi-domesticated hawk fly to your hand is just an extraordinary experience.
Did you say that you were exploring medieval falconry, or is there a difference between that and what people do today, or was it medieval or just falconry in general?
It was just falconry, except to the extent that it hasn't really changed that much. It's interesting because falconry right now is actually having kind of a resurgence, because it can be used as sort of a natural deterrent to keep away seagulls or smaller birds from areas that you don't want them to be. In particular, they're often used in vineyards. We'll have falconers. Some historical monuments have them. When I was traveling in Wales with my family, Caernarfon has I think he's still technically a falconer, but he carries an owl. So his job was to walk around the public places. So we saw him first at a marketplace where they were having a big outdoor market, and then later on at one of the pubs where they had outdoor music and seating, to keep the seagulls away. So the seagulls are intimidated. Yep.
Just walking around deters the seagulls because they see the owl, or does he let it? Okay. Okay. I know that vineyards are using a lot of hawks and owl boxes and things without a falconer, just to have them around to help with the rats and things. So
exactly.
And at the beach in La Jolla, they have a falconer who comes.
Oh, wow.
He's out there to, yeah. So I always wondered though, why the birds return, because it's not like they have a ring around their neck where they can't eat their prey, right?
Right. That's why I say semi-domesticated. They're really not tame, at least in the US. It's essentially a partnership. And as long as it's easier to hang out with you and get regular meals and be safe in your mews at night, the birds generally return. They feel like it's a good investment. It's a good bargain for them. They bring you their prey. They get part of it, or a chick or something else kind of in return. And it's very satisfying for them. It's actually called living at hack, which is the origin of the phrase hack writer, the idea that you have this kind of bargain where you receive something in exchange for your labor, but you're not really an employee. So the falcons are kind of the same way. In the US, at least at the time that I was taking the workshop, falconers needed to basically capture a wild bird. And there are two types of hawks that you could start with. So you need to go out into the woods, understand enough about the birds that you can bring one home, and then establish that bond. In the UK, they think that's kind of barbaric, and they only use captive bred birds. So it's a very different sort of relationship and a different sort of approach. I had the opportunity to learn about the UK version when I was over there in Scotland a couple of years ago now. And I took a shorter workshop there working with one hawk and then an owl. And it was interesting to see the different perspectives on the relationship between the falconer and the birds.
It's kind of funny because both sides have negativity. I'm going to use that word. Because one, you're stealing it from, I know they steal out of the nests, usually babies, right?
Right.
In the US. So they steal a baby, which is taking its freedom. And the other is birds that don't have freedom ever because they're all bred in captivity and they're never free. Both sound horrible to me. But also good because they're being safe. It's that mixture of like living at a zoo provides safety and helps keep some animals alive that are facing, trouble in natural habitats. So
There's certainly a lot of considerations.
yeah, a lot. And I know they're well cared for, usually really well cared for.
So, yeah, I always just wondered why. I mean, I know they, like, when they hunt with osprey, when they fish with them, they put the ring around the neck so the bird can't swallow the fish. So the bird doesn't really have a choice, but the hawk always did. And I always wondered why come back. And I can see that a lot more if you've raised it than if
Right.
you catch one.
Yeah,
I guess
Well,
if
they
you
don't,
caught an adult bird.
but they do catch babies though, so they are still growing up with it. I
Yeah.
mean, they don't usually catch adult birds usually. I don't
At
think.
the falconer that I worked with, her husband was also a falconer, and one of the things that they did was rehab. So if someone had found a bird of prey that was injured, they would be brought to this location. And on one occasion, there was a falcon that had been injured, and her husband was the one who was nursing it back to health and working with it every day. It imprinted on him. Imprint is probably not quite the right word because this was an adult bird, but it considered him to be its partner. It would get very upset if she tried to go anywhere near him or the bird. It would fly at her. It would attack her. Clearly, the bird had an attachment now, and this man is mine. So even in adult birds, they can still form those kinds of bonds.
And I was thinking, Elizabeth has done a lot of bird rescue, well, what rehab, I guess, babies and stuff.
Rehab.
And some of
Mhm.
them imprint on you and stay around forever. Keep
Well,
coming
not
back to
forever.
the house. They keep
Some
coming back to the house.
Mhm.
some do it. It a lot depends on the species as
Right.
well as the individual. I mean, that's always really interesting to see the commonalities in a species and the individual things within a species
Yeah.
of a bird, which vary. So yeah, that's interesting. But I've never had one that comes around forever and ever. So who knows?
Elaine, we also wanted to ask you a little bit about your interactive novel and what that is and how that works, because we're unfamiliar.
So this was my pandemic hobby. A lot of people decided to write a book for the first time. I decided to take my fiction in a different direction. I had some contacts at the company Choice of Games who had suggested previously that perhaps I would like to write a book for them. So I thought it over and I said, sure. And what kinds of things are you looking for? I prepared 4 different pitches. The one they selected was a superhero, hometown hero concept. The idea is that it's a second person work. So you, the hero, have come back to your hometown for a couple of different reasons, to spend more time with your aunt after her wife passed, and because of some issues that you may have had out there in the world. But you discover that there are some insidious forces at work in your hometown. So it was a very different writing experience because of that you protagonist, because the player, the reader, basically takes on that character, and there are some choices they can make about the character's gender, their romantic preferences, that will then change how the character is presented to the rest of the book. So because there's an algorithm behind it and a lot of programming goes into it, that means if you decide early on, oh, I'm a gay man, then the protagonist's pronouns will change. And through the book, they'll be referred to as he by other characters, and your romantic interests will be presented as male. So it was a little bit dissociating for me from the main character, because ordinarily I'm in charge of all those things. I get to make all those choices and then see what happens and what ramifications there are. From that perspective, it was very different from writing a novel in the usual fashion. But also it meant that I could do all the brainstorming I ordinarily do to write an outline. But instead of picking one scene and going with it, I could say, oh, I'm going to write 4 scenes. And depending on which choice the reader makes, they'll see one of those scenes. Then hopefully they'll get excited and they'll want to go back and reread it, and they'll make a different choice and see a different scene. And those things, again, can have ramifications through the entire text. So one of my novels ordinarily is about 100,000 words long. The interactive book is about 330,000 words long.
I was going to ask you that. And it reminds me of Choose Your Own Adventure, though I'm too old for that. I did not grow up with those, but everyone I know talks about them. But that was in a book form, right? And this is on video.
Yeah, so it's still text-based.
Okay.
So there are a few illustrations of characters that will pop up when you make certain choices. Then you'll be presented with a view of the character that you're meeting, which is pretty cool. But it's very much like the Choose Your Own Adventure, except with Choose Your Own Adventure, you would read a page, you'd get to the end of the page, and it would say, oh, do you choose to go left or right? And then go to this page number or that page number. So with the interactive novel, you could get to the end of that page, and it would say, if you're feeling especially brave, you can go through the door that's ahead of you. If you want to be sneaky so they don't know you're coming, you can slide down the corridor to your right. If you want to nope out of the whole situation because you want to be more subtle, then you can make a different choice. So, and then each of those choices will change not only what you see next, but also it will change some attributes about the character. Because you made a bold choice, your character becomes more bold. Or because you made a sneaky choice, your character becomes more stealthy.
How fun.
So what about the ending? Do you have different endings for all? And once you've chosen your sneaky character, does that predetermine what their ending's going to be, or could they still end up in the bold ender somehow?
Right. They can still make a lot of different choices that will change that throughout the chapters of the book. Some of the encounters or some of the structure of the book doesn't change. So when you get there, you may be presented with the same choice, but there'll be different kind of attributes about that based on the choices you've made previously. And then I don't know if I know how many different endings there are, probably 20 or more. Some of those endings can occur kind of early. If things are going very badly for you, then you might find yourself not getting to the final chapter, not getting to the big confrontation with the bad guy. Or you may choose to try to be diplomatic. You can also try to win the hearts and minds of the followers of the bad guy, or of some of the other characters you meet, and then they can become your allies, or they can help you. So you have the possibility of drawing in other characters on your side toward the end, which is kind of fun too. And that can change aspects of the ending that you see.
And is this aimed at teens? I mean, adults probably should read it too, but is it aimed for teens? Was it's YA?
Not specifically, no.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Wow. Wow. We'll put a link below to that. I mean, to your novels, and people can look things up. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, you said there are about 20 endings, and are there 20 choices for each thing, or maybe just 2? And you know what I mean?
Each of the scenes, if you will have 3 to 5 options when you reach the end of that scene that you'll choose among.
Wow.
And then the combination of scenes that you view and the combination of choices that you make when you get there will determine which ending you eventually arrive at. And even then, there are variations. So you might have a particular ending to the overall external plot, but if you decided that your character is romantic and they want to try to get someone to fall in love with them, then there are other aspects of the ending that will come into play because of a relationship that you may have formed over the course of that book too. Whereas if you've decided your character is not romantic, then that will be not relevant and you just won't see any of that.
Wow. Do you follow each through line? like when you're writing it?
A little bit. It was more sort of following the possibilities each time, knowing what each chapter would contain. This is the chapter where this big important thing happens. I'm trying not to say too much because I don't want to do a lot of
that's
spoilers.
Right.
Right, but like, for instance, there's a big confrontation at the dam. So you go to the dam, the bad guys are there, what are you going to do? And then I would have to say, okay, well, what are the possibilities here at the dam? How will those influence choices going forward? And then in the next chapter, how you enter that chapter will depend a lot on what choices you made while you were at the dam.
Wow. It's very
Fascinating.
complicated. My brain kind of explodes thinking about how you did it.
A lot of the authors use like giant whiteboard to write things down. I did a lot of note cards.
Which your
So
cat played with and messed up. So
sometimes that helps, you know, she
I know,
introduces new
exactly.
possibilities. It's very exciting.
Exactly. It's like, I never thought of that. Thank you.
And we wanted also, shifting subjects again, you have a new novel coming out. I think it's co-written, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about
Crossbones.
that? Tell us about it.
So in my subgenre of action adventure, there seems to be a lot of co-written books. Authors will meet up with somebody at a conference, or they'll have a writing buddy and be like, hey, we should do something together. Sometimes it involves characters that they've written separately, and sometimes it'll be a whole new cast of characters. In this case, my writing buddy, Douglas Pratt, had a side character that he'd written about in a couple of his books, who is more or less a professional treasure hunter, Ricky Talons. And he thought she was pretty cool. He was getting some good feedback from the fans, so he wanted to spin her out into her own series, but he's also writing 2 other series. So he wasn't sure he had the time to focus on that. And he kind of put out a call and said, hey, I'm looking for somebody who can step up with me and work on this. And Doug is pretty cool. I love his books. So I said, I might be interested in that. Let's talk. So we went back and forth. We did a couple of Zoom sessions where we sort of hashed out the plan in general for how to do a collaboration, because it's the first time for me. He's done some other collaborations with other authors. And then developed our working method, basically, and also came up with the outline for the book. So it's been an exciting process so far. Right now, the book is in his court, and hopefully he's going to give me some feedback on that. He is the boat expert, and the protagonist lives on a boat. The book takes place in the Florida Keys, and it involves a hunt for a lost pirate ship and the pirate queen who died there. So Ricky is a historian. She's very much invested in the history, and in particular in bringing forward historical voices that may not have been heard, whereas her antagonist in the book is very much out for the gold.
So that's
So
cool.
you
So
read 4 chapter and, read over the other person's chapter and then go on with your own and send it back and forth. Is that?
In this case, after we developed the outline together and did the brainstorming, I wrote the first draft. We came up with that outline, made some changes to the first few chapters, and then I jumped back in to finish up the draft and sent it over to him. So it's a little, I think some of the other people that he's worked with, they've done sort of alternating chapters, especially if it's a multiple point of view novel. It's relatively common for authors to collaborate by saying, oh, I write this point of view and the other person writes that other point of view.
is this something, well, I'm sure you enjoyed it. I won't ask you that. That's put you on the spot. So when is it coming out? When is the release date?
Our planned release date is September. We had originally said January, but we were able to pull it together faster than we thought. We have an awesome cover by another author, Dave Behrens. And the book is called Crossbones.
And we'll have links below for either pre-order if you happen to come before it's come out, or for ordering generally once it's released. So
Cool.
awesome. Yeah.
So thank you so much for talking to us. It's been delightful. And man, I feel like I know so much more about different I didn't know about the medieval groups and all that. Medieval surgery sounds quite awful.
I know.
I actually sold an article called The Brighter Side of Medieval Surgery.
Oh, really?
because yes, they're, especially when you think about an operation like trepanation, which means they literally cut a hole in your head, but they were doing it for all the right reasons. It's actually still performed today to relieve the pressure on an impacted skull wound. We have better techniques. We certainly have better cleanliness and antiseptics, which helps a lot. But especially the surgeons of the period tended to share a lot of information. If they made a discovery that helped them to solve certain kinds of problems, they were writing treatises, they were passing that information around, trying to spread the word so that other surgeons in other areas were able to help their clients as well. And it was certainly a very fraught period of time to be a doctor or to have to visit a doctor, which gave me a lot of opportunities for conflict. Yay. But even then they were trying their best, working hard and hoping to make people's lives better.
I want the anesthesia and the pain meds, but other than that,
Yeah. Well,
Good
that's
choice.
they didn't know so much that
True.
that's
Mhm.
scary, about disease, basically.
Yeah.
Red
went to
germ.
there's a museum in Florence, I think it is. It's the Galileo Science Museum, and they have like pictures of different things from all different periods, but they have some medical stuff that's pretty horrific. Just because people didn't know. I mean, yeah, they didn't know the
Right.
body.
They
But
didn't-
like you said, that's they're beginning. They're trying. We didn't know as much. And I know probably in 100 years or 200 years from now, people are going to look back at a lot of what we do as barbaric. Now,
It's
you
true.
If
know,
we're still around.
yeah,
If there's
yes,
anyone to look back.
that's true. Let's not go down that road. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me,
It's
Andrea and Evie.
really
Yeah,
wonderful.
it was. And we always end with the best thing I learned this week. So you have the brighter side of medieval history, I guess, and other things. So the best thing I learned this week, there's a kind of lobster called the spotted lobster. It's not really a fisherman, favorite, a menu favorite, which is very good for the lobster and also for coral. It lives in Florida mostly, and Florida reefs are just decimated. But they found that this lobster pees a lot, and the urine of the lobster actually deters things like fireworms and certain snails that eat coral. So and in addition, the lobster will eat some of these things when they're like planting baby corals, which are very yummy to a lot of creatures. The lobster tends to feast on those predators. So I thought that was cool. Oh, and along the same lines, certain kinds of whales can defecate at will when they're chased by orcas and sort of cloud the water. So those are my two.
Go excrement, powerful excrement.
Those are my two best things.
I always end up, Elaine, I'm always like scrambling at the end going, oh, God, I don't have anything to share. So this morning I was looking up and I found a thing about, Elizabeth probably knows this, the small tooth sawfish, which is endangered, and they are also in Florida. And it's taken 18 years of research by this group called the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. They've been studying them and trying to find them, and it's been very tough. Every month they go out and try to find one or two. But they've discovered that the babies, when they're in the mother's womb, because they're live born, have a protective sheath over their long saw teeth that's like 2 layers of skin, but they said it feels kind of like paraffin wax, so that when they're in there together, they don't injure each other or their mother with their sharp teeth. And after they're born, they end up about 4 days later, I think it was 4 days, they lose that sheath. It dissolves so that then they have their teeth. But there are pictures of it too. It's pretty cool. So that was my best thing. And now it's your turn, Elaine.
So I've been researching for my next book, which is called Conquistador's Blood. And there's a person who is sometimes referred to as the first African American. His name was Esteban, and he was an enslaved man who was brought over from Spain to New Spain by way of Cuba as part of the conquistador fleet. When the expedition that he was with in Florida, and this is in the early 1530s, gets essentially shipwrecked, he and a handful of survivors are able to survive by working with and sometimes against the local indigenous people, as he led the way for the group of survivors all the way across from about Galveston Island up through potentially as high as New Mexico and back to Mexico, where they could be reunited with the rest of their Spanish brethren who were already establishing colonies down in Mexico. So I thought that was sort of a fascinating historical character and someone that I think most people have probably never heard about. In the Spanish accounts, they kind of try to play down his role by mostly playing up what they themselves have done. Like, oh, look at me, I survived this amazing thing. But when you read between the lines of the history, you can sort of see that actually it was this other guy, possibly because he was more open to some of the ideas around spirituality and the gods that the indigenous people had, so he was better able to relate to them. That's one of the theories. But I think that's a fascinating little sort of side note in history and someone that we should know more about.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. I look forward to reading that.
You have so much fast. We could talk for hours.
For hours. Well, we'll have to have you back maybe when
Yeah.
right around when the next book is coming out. Because
A lot
yeah,
of the
we just scratched the surface. I never got to the archaeology either.
Ooh,
Yeah,
true.
there's so much to talk about. Yeah. All
So
right, well,
we want to thank our producer, Maria Korolov, for making this all possible. We couldn't do it without you, nor could we do it without Alex Korolov, who edits this together and makes us look good. Thank you.
absolutely. Thank you. And please, for those of you who are viewing this, like and leave comments below. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. And be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification button so you won't miss any episodes. And if you want to support our publication and help us publish more original content, please support us on our Patreon page. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, thank you, ELAINE E.C. Ambrose. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.